The NBA schedule just dropped and the clock is officially ticking on this version of the Pelicans. They have to start fast. It's Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Pelicans. I'm your host, Jake Madison. Do you hear that? I'm not wearing a watch, but do you hear that ticking? That's a clock ticking on this version of the New Orleans Pelicans after the NBA just released its schedule, and they did the Pelicans no favors. The lighting on the camera here does not look good on me on YouTube, but we're going to break this down. We're going to get into the back-to-backs. I want to get into the 3 games, 4 nights, all the stats. That's in the next segment here. There are pitfalls during the season. There's like no national TV games here, but I think the first 20 games are the most important start or part of the season, bar none here. The Pelicans must start fast. The first 20 games aren't just about getting off to a good start. This is going to set the direction, the tone for the remainder of the season here. Because if you are not a good team by the trade deadline, the Pelicans need to be sellers at the trade deadline and blow up this group. The end of season can be tough. We've seen the Pelicans get in holes and not quite be able to get out of that. That can be a trap. So you got to start fast. And guess what? While the schedule is tough, the first 20 games, really the first 8 of these games are exceptionally manageable here. The Pelicans are actually in a very good position to be able to do this. Indiana at home, at Utah, at Denver, Denver back at home against Sacramento, home against Atlanta, at Memphis, home against Utah. Those are the first 8 games there. Those are all winnable games other than maybe the 2 Denver games. There is a legitimate chance that the Pelicans should get off to a 6-2 start. 5-3, honestly, at the minimum, in my opinion here. Indiana, yeah, they have Tyrese Halliburton coming back. They were terrible last year. Get that win. Utah is going to try and win this year because they don't control their draft picks going forward. But guess what? They're still relying on 2 young guys, Ace Bailey, Darren Peterson, who aren't going to necessarily be ready for that. Larry Markkinen, Jaren Jackson Jr., good vets, but are they ready to elevate that team to playoff level? And I'm not sure. So that's a winnable game here, I think. You need to do well in these opening 8 games, and the NBA finally gave the Pelicans a lifeline for this sort of thing. If you come out super flat, right? If you're 4-4, if you're, 3-5 in this, if you can't win your early part of the schedule, the easy part of your schedule that's designed at wins, I don't know what to tell you, right? Well, I do. It's not good. When you look at the first 20 games, 12 of them are at home. Yeah, there's difficult games mixed in. You've got Denver 3 times in the first 20 games, Minnesota, Detroit, OKC, San Antonio. But that's normal NBA scheduling. This isn't a brutal first 20 games here. If you can go 12-8, not super insane, that says something. It shows Mosley's raising the floor on defense. Maybe Zion, Trey, and Herb can really anchor something meaningful here. And the young guys are helping. If you're 11-9, you're at least showing enough to evaluate this roster, in my opinion, a little bit more. But if you're 10-10, if you're 9-11 or worse, there are alarm bells that should be going off. Because if you're under 500 after the friendly portion of your schedule, what exactly are you waiting for? What exactly do you think is going to turn around and what is going to happen here? And so that's what gets really interesting to me about this. If the Pelicans cannot establish themselves, again, during the portion of the schedule that's designed for them to bank wins, because there's some stretches in here that we'll look at next that are brutal, y'all. Mardi Gras is not going to be fun for the New Orleans Pelicans here. If you can't get wins during that period, at that point, you need to be looking for reasons to not sell on nearly everybody on the team at that point. You need to find reasons to not sell Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Sadiq Bey, even, depending on what happens with his extension here. The question starts to become, if you just can't get off to a good start in those first 20 games, are you actually building towards something, or are you just delaying the inevitable here? There will be some elements of figuring it all out, putting it together with a new coach in Jamal Mosley. I don't want to completely get rid of that idea, get rid of that concept. But at a certain point, it doesn't matter. You just got to go and get a lot of these wins here. In those first 20 games, 7 games are against teams that won 26 or fewer games last year. Now, not always, they're not tanking at this point in time, but still, only 9 games of the first 20 are against teams that won at least 45. That's kind of the benchmark here for you. So, the strength of schedule based on last year, and this isn't necessarily predictive or anything, the first 20 games is under 500. It's above 500 for the final 20. And I think that's worth keeping in mind. If you're rating on a scale of 1 to 10, the Pelicans opening stretch of games here, honestly, it's not above a 6. It's pretty low, but you've got to find a reason to keep guys you don't got to find a reason. If you are not doing well, you've got to start thinking already about development for the young guys in Fears, in Queen, neither of whom I have projected could change starting for this team. Okay, what are you doing then if you drafted those guys, in the lottery in 1 year and they're not starting for you, by the middle of year 2? They need to kind of open the door, open a pathway for those guys, clear the deck for those guys. If you're not winning games, it's time to do that, and it changes your approach to the rest of the season, in my opinion. Yeah, Mosley needs some adjustment period and all that, but look, you hired him because, then don't state your goal is to win, really. Don't state that, we like our team, we'd like to make it better, but we feel really good about it. It can be, you can set realistic expectations. You heard the Chicago Bulls do this with Bryson Graham, former Pelicans GM, now running that team. He was on record in his introductory press conference being like, next year, we're not as competitive as we want. We're going to take a bit of a different look. The Bulls aren't expecting then to go out and win games and dominate or do well in their first 20. All of a sudden fans understand what the expectation is here, but the expectation that the Pelicans have set by not trading anybody away is, we like this team, we think he can compete. That's what you're saying. If you don't start Fears, if you don't start Queen, the expectation is not just development, it's winning games. That's the message they send, whether they directly say it or not. And they're not going to come out and be like, at media day, it's not going to be playoffs or bust. We've got to make the playoffs this year. It'll be, we need to compete. We need it. BS. It's playoffs or bust here with this group. And if you can't get it done in the first 20 games of the season, you need to start planning for what you're going to be doing at the trade deadline and what next season is going to look like and get a big time jump on that. But the good news is, if you want to be competitive, your answer is coming in these first 20 games. You're not, with the way the rest of the schedule shakes out, if you don't bank these wins early, you're not making the postseason. Monday's show is actually going to be about teams, unless some big crazy news breaks. Monday's show is going to be about teams that go on a second half run, and can they carry that over? Is that realistic? Is that fool's gold? I did all the analysis on it. I've got a really insightful and great show coming for y'all on Monday. You don't want to miss this one, because the rest of the schedule for the Pelicans this year is rough. You're probably not going to find wins, even if you somehow, and it's not sustainable if you go on a late season run here. You need to do this early. If you can't do that when presumably everyone's going to be healthy, there's no wear and tear on the body, you haven't done tons of back-to-backs and all that, then it's probably not going to happen, and you need to acknowledge that, you need to accept that, and you need to now a plan for it and make moves based around that. These first 20 games, especially these first 8, are very winnable for the New Orleans Pelicans. It's time to prove it or not. Coming up next, because if you don't prove it, there's some stretches of schedule here that are brutal. I'll give you the stats on the back-to-backs, 3 games, 4 nights, all of that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by Odoo. Running a business shouldn't feel like you're trying to connect a bunch of systems that were never designed to work together. One app for accounting, another for inventory, another for sales, and somehow none of them talk to each other. And that's where Odoo comes in. Odoo is an all-in-one business management software that brings every part of your business together in one powerful platform. From sales and accounting to inventory and marketing, everything works in one place, helping your team move faster, stay organized, and focus on growing the business instead of managing software. The best organizations know that success isn't just about talent. It's about having everyone working towards the same goal. And that's true in sports, just like it is in business here. When you look at these top organizations It's these top teams in the NBA. Everyone is pulling in the same direction. It's not just one player, one coach, one front office person. It's a coordinated effort across the entire organization to make it successful. So great organizations win because operations matter, and that's why you should get Odoo. Try for free at odoo.com/lockedon. That's odoo.com/lockedon to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 12,000, almost 13,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well, and become an everydayer. It means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below for your second listen. It's Locked On NBA. Wes, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't forget, you can also watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Same place you watch your Pelicans play, and now we know when you're going to be able to watch the Pelicans play. Season starts October 21st against the Indiana Pacers. So I'll get into the stats and everything about the schedule here in a moment. I do want to point something out on what has been released. There are only 80 games. You'll see even just like a break of like, why don't they play from December 2nd through December 13th? They do. There's only 80 games on the schedule because of the NBA Cup, that if you don't make it to the knockout rounds, you gain 2 additional games. They get scheduled during that period of time. That's how you've seen, this is where things can get a little bit weird, and maybe you play a team 5 times or 3 times when you're only supposed to play them 2. The games will get scheduled in that period for everybody here. So only 80 games on the schedule right now for all of that. All right. The schedule is brutal, frankly, for the New Orleans Pelicans here. It is not the easiest thing. We know they're going to play every Eastern Conference team once at home, once on the road. They're scheduled to play Western Conference opponents 4 times, with the exception of Golden State. I'd probably rather play them 4 times. The Lakers, Clippers, Minnesota, Phoenix, and Portland. Those are the teams that you're playing 3 times instead of 4. Mixed bag in there. Lakers should be good. Golden State's fine. Minnesota's going to be good. Phoenix should be okay. Portland is going to be in the middle here too. But you're not avoiding some of the top tier teams there. You'd like Denver and others. You'd like to get them 3 times. Great tool for you to use that I'm using here is over from our friend of the show, Shamit Dua, in the no.net. He's got some really great tools, and he's got a schedule analysis out there that kind of shows you the back-to-backs, 3 games in 4 nights, net rests, all of those things that we look at with the schedule. The Pelicans are tied with 5 others for the most back-to-backs in the league with 16. It's about 2 more than league average here. They have the most by themselves of 3 games in 4 nights. So a back-to-back, 1 night off, then you play again. They have 27 of those. The league average on that is 21. So it's a pretty significant jump. Net rest is when your opponent is, you are off and your opponent is on like the second night of a back-to-back. The Pelicans are actually negative in this. So they have when you look at net rest advantage, it's -5. So it's taking when you have a rest advantage minus when you don't. The Pelicans are -5 on that sort of thing. They actually have a rest disadvantage in 13 of their games. They have an actual rest advantage in just 8. So that kind of sorts out to being, not great. Fewest in the league. In terms of rest disadvantage, it's actually the second most in the league, but for rest advantage, it's also fifth fewest here. So it's not great. Go check it out. It's really useful to kind of just visualize some of what's going on here. But there's a couple of stretches that are just brutal for New Orleans. And honestly, the toughest stretch, in my opinion, if the beginning part of the season doesn't actually make or break your year, this is the part that it's going to. It's in the lead up to the February 11th NBA trade deadline. From January 10th to February 10th, you hear me kind of struggling for words. It's that hard. This includes when the Pelicans go to Europe to play in France, Paris, France, and then Manchester. You are on January 10th at Miami. The 14th, you are in Paris. Then you are in Manchester on the 17th. Then you fly back for a home game on the 20th, just 3 days later against Oklahoma City. You're at home against Dallas. You're at home against Cleveland. These are all not easy wins. On the road for a one-game road trip at Houston on the 27th. Home against Philly on the 28th. Then you go on the Mardi Gras road trip starting on January 30th. And here's how it goes. At Cleveland, that's going to be tough. At Philly, it's going to be tough. At Orlando, going to be tough. At the Wizards, you can get that one. At Chicago, you can maybe get that one. At Indiana, they should be in form at that point in time. And then at Atlanta, that's a brutal, literal month of games. Even the home games in that stretch are not easy, right? OKC, Dallas, Cleveland, Philly, and that's it in that period of time. And then that ends literally the day before the NBA trade deadline. So you might have guys that aren't playing some of these games. They're going to be swirling in rumors. You think that's not going to get brought up an absolute ton when they're overseas. You're very, very wrong. And those two games, by the way, it's against San Antonio. It says it's against San Antonio, in Paris. It's technically an away game in Paris, then a home game for the Pelicans in Manchester here, but you're playing Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs in all of that. That is just brutal when you look at it, right? Like when you really think about it here, that's about as tough of a stretch, I think, as you're going to find. There's also an early stretch, I think, when you look at November 13th through the 21st here. So we're jumping backwards here where you start, an NBA Cup game against Memphis, but you have 2 back-to-backs during that stretch. And you have 6 games in 9 days. You also have an OKC, then San Antonio back-to-back. You're at OKC on November 20th and then at San Antonio on November 21st. That's disgusting. You're going to just go up against the top 2 teams in the Western Conference from last year on a back-to-back when you're playing 6 games in 9 days. It's pretty rough when you look at all of this, I think. And then let's say the Pelicans tread water. They're doing okay. Let's jump ahead to March here, where we're looking at the schedule. March 21st to April 8th is also pretty rough. This is almost like the entirety of the remainder of the schedule here. If you're fighting for the play-in spot, the 9th or 10th spot there, you have 9 games during that stretch, but 7 of them on the road. You're at Boston, you get Boston at home, but you're at Boston, at New York, at Dallas, home against Boston, at Milwaukee, it's winnable, but at OKC, home against Washington, then at Denver, then at Utah. That's a brutal stretch to end the season here, in my opinion. Whereas, are you going to be able to this is why I said you got to bank those wins early. You're not going to make them up later. The schedule is pretty tough when you look at it, and if you don't bank them early, that Mardi Gras plus Europe stretch, I think, can really just set you back. That's about as hard as it gets here. And then you got that little kind of trap at the end with all that. 7 road games in 9. If you're hopefully they're playing their best form. They figured it out. Jamal Mosley has gotten to him. All of those things you'll round into form here. No, you're probably not going to make up the ground late. What this team needs to do is bank wins early, survive Europe and that Mardi Gras gauntlet that you have, and then don't enter March desperately needing wins. That's why a start in those first 20 that's even 9 and 11 would actually be a problem because you're already behind before the schedule gets exceptionally tough for this team. Woof. Plus when it's, 16 back-to-backs, 27 3 games in 4 nights. All of that is pretty brutal. A couple other quick stats here for you with it. They've got 10 games on Sunday, 15 games on Monday, just 5 games on Tuesday, 17 games on Wednesday, 8 games Thursday, 13 games on Friday, and Saturday has 12 games here. They have 4 home back-to-backs. They have a 5-game home stretch a couple of times throughout the season, November 11th to 18th, December 16th through 23rd, and then December 31 to January 8th. The best home stretch, by the way, is December 16th to January 8th, and that's 10 of 13 at home. We'll see. It's going to be interesting. They have most of the games, by the way, are 6 p.m. or later. Most of the games this year for them, 7 p.m. Central. 6 of them are at 5 p.m. You have one 1 p.m. game and one 5 p.m. game. So majority of them are just going to be, those are the home tip-off times, going to be usual time here in New Orleans. Coming up next, national TV games. Are there any? Let's look at that coming up here next. That says something. I'll tell you what it says coming up here next. Wrong button. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 12,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. It means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. Don't forget Locked On Saints as your second listen today. Preseason, baby. Joint practices with the Jaguars here. Make Locked On Saints your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right. The Pelicans, national TV games, dose 2. And it's those European games against the San Antonio Spurs in Paris and in Manchester. That's it. There's not one other national TV game for the New Orleans Pelicans here. And honestly, this says volumes about this team and what people around the league think of them. Look, this is just a fact. As of right now, Zion Williamson is no longer a draw. As of right now, that can change. His trainer, Chris Crisp, who's posting all the social media, believes the comeback season is happening. That's good. Love that, right? But when you look at this era, the Pelicans went 26-56 last year, 11th in the West, 11 games out of the 10th seed that they were trying to get to. This is a team that has repeatedly promised so much and then not even come close to delivering on that. That is the Zion Williamson era. They haven't been a consistent playoff team. Zion hasn't played in the playoffs. Half the time when they were on national TV, it seemed like Zion Williamson wasn't playing because he was hurt. This is not the league disrespecting the Pelicans or anything like that. This is truthfully the league being like, yeah, we don't care about that team. It's like worse than active disrespect in a sense, right? It's like when your mom or dad is like, I'm not mad at you, I'm just disappointed, and it hurts so much more. That's kind of what the league is like almost saying here, I think. The league is telling you where this franchise it currently sits in the NBA hierarchy. That this should be a message being sent to Joe Dumars. This should be a message being sent to Gail Benson and to ownership as well here. No one wants to see this team play because there's no excitement behind it. They didn't do anything this offseason, like literally nothing. Well, not literally, but they virtually did nothing here. That's what the league is looking at, being like, you won 26 games and you're going to run the whole thing back. For the fans of this team, Locked On Pelicans listeners who are frustrated that they ran it back, I get it. The league is kind of with you too. But what the league can do is just be like, we're not going to highlight you when it comes to this. For a team that, look, continually, has kind of hyped itself up and then fallen on their face, this is where you end up. When Zion Williamson was drafted and, in a year or two after that, they were like #1 when it came to national TV games. They were in the top because people wanted to see Zion Williamson play. He was that interested, people were that interested in him. The hype was so real. And now look, like you started at the top and now you're here. This is a stark fall, truthfully, to see what has happened over, look, the Zion Williamson era. It's not the David Griffin era anymore. It's the Zion Williamson era. It's exceptionally disappointing to see this, to see how it has all gone and that this team has not found a way to navigate this any better. But look, there can be a challenge buried in this if you want there to be. You want a silver lining? I know y'all hate when I say that. National TV games can change, right? The league flexes games in later in the season. So if Zion Williamson is dominating, if Trey Murphy takes another leap, if Jeremiah Fears and Derek Queen show a lot of potential and are getting significant minutes, if Jamal Mosley has them fighting for the 5th or 6th seed here, people will want to see the New Orleans Pelicans. They'll have a really great narrative, a really great story. Look at how this team turned it around. Joe Dumars, Troy Weaver will be getting a lot of hype and attention. And I will be saying wonderful things and being like, I was wrong. So the people will want to see the New Orleans Pelicans if you're winning games. They've got to earn that, though. They're going to need to earn that attention by January, especially with the way the schedule is, because it's going to be a tough go here, right? You've got to earn it. And the Pelicans have been, or now the NBA is saying, like, we've given you just too much attention. You don't deserve it anymore. Go and earn it here, right? You know, look, Europe and those 2 games against Wemby in Paris and Manchester are going to be a really great thing for New Orleans here. You know, Victor Wembanyama, or not, Zion Williamson has done a very good job, I think, against Victor Wembanyama, truthfully. But this is Wemby, you know, playing in his country. You're involved in a massive international showcase here. They're not the primary attraction. That's the Spurs and Wembanyama it is here. But if you win those 2 games, if Zion Williamson puts on a show in those 2 games and upstages Victor Wembanyama, scores on the Defensive Player of the Year, all of that, people will take note of that. Look, if you want more national TV games, win. If you want to keep this core together and build around these players and believe in them, win. If you want national media, other fan bases to stop discussing whether Trey Murphy or Herb Jones should be traded, win games, right? If you want this offseason to truthfully look like discipline versus passivity or scaredness, win games. That's what it is here. You know, the Pelicans are kind of being given a challenge here. They should take this. They're not being disrespected. They should take it as being disrespected and hopefully use that to motivate yourself this year, because they're going to kind of need anything that they can. Monday's show, I've got analysis on teams that make a run in the second half of the season. Like if the Pelicans make a run and somehow make the play-in tournament, what does that say? It's actually really interesting on if those teams are actually good long-term or not. I'm going to share that with you. That's going to be Monday's episode on Locked On Pelicans, kind of built around the schedule being released here. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Be back with y'all on Monday. Enjoy the weekend.